Money Sense is brought to you with the support of OneTradeX. OneTradeX, the Cayman Islands' #1 choice for online brokerage.
Live from Radio Cayman Studio, this is
Money Sense, bringing an informed financial perspective to the Cayman community.
A very good morning and warm welcome to Money Sense. Your hosts, as usual, are Christoph Barnett, Neville Hicks, and myself, Simon Caudry. Good morning, gents.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
We are delighted to be joined in the studio this morning by Randy Tolber. Randy is the Director for CFA Institute Society Relations in the Americas. Randy is visiting Cayman for the sort of first time, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, and knows the region very well there because you've lived and worked in South Florida for a number of years. And also joined this morning by Monique Frederick, who is the past president of the CFA Society Cayman Islands. Thank you for joining us, Monique.
Good morning, Simon. Glad to be here.
Glad to be back. You've been on the show before, I'm not mistaken.
Yes, glad to be back. That's correct.
Good stuff. So let's start off the conversation. Let's just try and remind everybody what the CFA Institute is, what it stands for, and all those sorts of things, because it's actually the sponsor indirectly of this Money Sense radio show. We're all the hosts are CFA charter holders, and we often don't talk about what the CFA Institute is. Now we have a guest from the CFA Institute down on Ireland. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what the CFA Institute is, what it does, why it does it, and what it stands for? There's a whole host of questions for you.
Okay, I'll see if I can handle those. Well, CFA Institute is the global professional body for the investment management industry. We're a professional association, not-for-profit, that represents over 140,000 members and charter holders around the world. We are a credentialing organization that administers the CFA program and exams and that CFA designation, and we're also a member organization advocating for investor rights and systems, financial systems that
So 140,000 members around the world.
Yes.
And how many of those do we have in Cayman?
We have the membership for the Cayman Society is about 150.
Okay.
And of which 110 at least are resident on island.
Okay, and then the organization is in, how many countries did you say around the world? You said 140,000 members, but how many countries are we in now? Must be a fair good number.
Members are in countries all over the world. We have societies like the Cayman Society in 147. We have 147 societies in over 71 countries.
Okay,
Wow.
so 71 countries. I guess we should know these things as members ourselves. You've been with the Institute then yourself for how many years?
5 years. I joined in 2012.
And what did you do before getting involved in the industry? Your background is in the investment industry as well, correct?
That's right. I'm a charter holder myself. In the early part of my career, I was a portfolio manager for primarily high net worth individuals at a couple of banks in South Florida.
And why, perhaps you get asked this all the time, but why would someone leave the investment industry, the stress and the rest of it, and well, why go into what is in effect a not-for-profit industry? Because the Institute is a not-for-profit organisation. What caused you to make the move to get involved in that?
Well, that's right. I had been involved in the work of CFA Institute most of my career as a former board member and volunteer in the local South Florida and Miami societies when I was working in the industry. And when my family coincidentally moved to Charlottesville, Virginia, I was jumped at the opportunity to be able to work at CFA Institute and help them carry out their mission around the world. What's
the difference when you, having been in the investment industry, what's the difference then being a professional who's used to work in the stress of the investment industry versus working in a not-for-profit? Well, how do you find that?
I find it really refreshing, Simon. Everything that a not-for-profit organization does is centered around its mission. And so as opposed to corporate profits, we're interested in fulfilling our mission and using our revenues to that end.
Okay, fair enough.
And I think too, what's interesting, obviously, we're all members, and Simon, you've been past president, and we're all heavily involved in the CFA Society here, Christoph as well, and I think this is the reason why we're on the radio, and our listeners have to put up with us every second week. But I think, from our perspective, we get a lot of support from the Institute here locally to drive initiatives that we have and kind of focus on, what we're trying to do, which is really educate educate the greater populace or community, certainly based here in Cayman, on the importance of, the financial community here, the ethical standards behind that. So we certainly appreciate your support, Randy, in coming down here, and certainly the Institute has been very supportive of the society here, and I think that's certainly that global, I guess, reach and those 140,000 members across the world give us insight as to what's happening. We've done shows here about pensions. We draw on the Institute on a lot of that knowledge and kind of best practice globally, which, we try to, it's nice being part of a big community or a small community in a big pond. I don't know if that's the right analogy, but we kind of get to take the best and implement it here, which is kind of nice.
Nice. So you mentioned about the CFA Institute taking leadership in the financial industry or the investment industry. I guess one of the ways it does that is by the credentialing program, the CFA program, which we all are CFA charter holders. Perhaps you could just help educate those who are unfamiliar with what the CFA charter is. What is it? So, and why is it called a charter? I mean, perhaps I've never understood that. So what is the CFA charter? How do people get it?
Well, the CFA charter is a professional designation for investment management professionals. It is considered one of the highest regarded credentials in the industry, and really sets a gold standard for technical and ethical knowledge for those working in the industry. It is comprised of a series of 3 levels of examinations, covering a wide range of topics applicable to practitioners, including a very solid framework around ethical decision-making.
And if I'm not mistaken, it's 3 years of 6 hours each year, isn't it? Is that still the same?
That's right. Each exam is 6 hours.
18 hours of torture, if I remember correctly. Anyone else enjoy their exam?
I think it was more than 18 hours for me.
Well, I guess that's actually an interesting point. The average person who takes the exam fails, 1.5 levels worth of the exam? Is that roughly?
That's right. It's extremely rigorous, and actually less than 20% of candidates who start the program actually finish in the 3 years. So it's quite common to repeat at least one of the levels, but the average is 4.5 years.
And what are the pass rates of this exam? Because we've all fortunately got through it by hook, crook, or other, just by luck, perhaps in some of our cases. But what are the pass rates of the exams nowadays?
For the first level 1, the pass rate is usually somewhere in the low 40s.
Okay. And then level 2 and 3, do they get easier or harder now?
It's usually a little bit higher for those levels because folks having accomplished level 1 are better equipped for those next levels.
So someone who starts level 1, you've got 40% chance of passing, and then do level 2, and you've got a 45% chance of passing, and then level 3. Those maths are pretty poor, aren't
Exactly.
they, when you come to multiply all those out? And is the difficulty of the exam part of the attraction then of it, or part of what makes it, I think in your words, the gold standard for the industry?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why the pass rates are so hard and the program is so rigorous is that you can't get through it just memorizing formulas or information. You really must have a solid grasp on the concepts and be able to apply them in multiple scenarios, which is how the exams are structured. So those individuals who actually get through and earn their charters really have a solid preparation for the industry.
So let's talk a little bit now about what the Institute does. There are, and this is where it might get a little bit confusing, not least to me, but there are 140,000 members. But the Institute is a...
When you say members, you really mean
CFA chart holders.
Chartered Financial Analysts worldwide.
So 140,000 of us around the world. But the Institute is an institute of... How many people work at the Institute now?
Roughly 600 around the world. We have offices all over the world, including our original base in Charlottesville, Virginia, but we have offices in London, Hong Kong, New York, Brussels, India, and China.
Isn't it? Yeah.
That's right.
So, but there's 600 or 700 people who work for the Institute, and you're trying to do something on a global basis, represent the investment management industry on a global basis. Firms like JP Morgan, which try and bank on a global basis, have hundreds of thousands of staff. How on earth does the Institute do such a thing on a global basis then?
Well, it's challenging, but going back to what Neville said and why we are so supportive of our society network around the world, we recognize that we can't accomplish our mission with just 600 staff and a few offices. We really rely on those 140,000 members to be our ambassadors and help us in their local markets doing the work that we can't do, being on the ground like those.
So there are about 170 societies?
147.
147. And Cayman, of course, is one of those societies. There are, 6 or 7 in the Caribbean now? I think it's about right.
Sounds about right.
About that. So what are the objectives then, and what are some of the things that the Cayman Society has done over the past few years? Perhaps, Monique, you want to address that?
Sure, Simon. The Cayman Society, like some of the other societies, obviously we try to be aligned with the overall mission of the Institute. But to apply it locally, the focus is certainly still on high ethical behavior, professional excellence, and educational development. And, we try to at least provide initiatives or content for all of our stakeholders. So that would include, obviously, the candidates, which, we assist in terms of providing information sessions, review courses, and mock exams. We also reach out to employers and regulators to make them aware of the program and the benefits either to the employer or the community at large. And then a large part of our outreach focuses on the general public. And some of those initiatives have included, and still do, obviously the radio show is one of them, where we try to improve financial literacy, but also publishing sort of investor guides, which are available on our website, or organizing educational events that are targeted to the general audience. And one of those events is an initiative called the Putting Investors First event, which is basically a way of it's an initiative that the CFA Institute commenced, and it's about taking a leadership role to shape a trustworthy, more forward-thinking financial industry, right? That better serves society. And our objective has been to educate the public either on what investor rights are, what you should expect from from finance professionals, and also just a basic understanding as to what the investment industry is about, and trying to increase and a greater focus, I guess, on ethics in the industry, which has led us to also work with the pension administrators and the pensions office in trying to provide courses about ethical decision making. So those are some of the initiatives. I mean, there are a number of others, but those, I think, are the key ones that would give some insight as to our involvement in trying to further the overall mission of the Institute.
Thank you. And one of the things you mentioned there was ethics and trying to change behavior in the industry. I think there's a lot of people who listen to financial news or the news in general who are probably quite disillusioned with the financial industry in general, because of all the various scandals that have happened across the world. And so we need to take a short break, but after the break, what I'd like to talk about is just some of the challenges that the industry faces and what the CFA Institute, what its role is, or what it thinks its role is, and what its goals are to try and solve those problems. So we'll talk about that after the break, and we'll just take a 2-minute break. Join us in 2 minutes.
This is
Money Sense, bringing an informed financial perspective to the Cayman community. Brought to you by the CFA Society Cayman Islands and sponsored by One Trade X.
And now, more Money Sense.
Welcome back. In the second half of today's show, we're going to continue our conversation with Randy Tolber, discussing the CFA Institute and what it does. Just before the break, we had hit upon the importance of ethics and the ethical constituents of the CFA exam, and also we alluded to some of the ethical challenges our industry, I suppose, has been facing. Randy, perhaps you could just give us a sense as to almost like the purpose of the CFA Institute, how it's evolved given some of the challenges and what challenges the industry has faced. So why are we where we are, and where are we, in fact, as an environment?
Well, as you know, the industry and finance in general faced a real setback after the global financial crisis and lost a lot of its good standing with the public. Surveys that we have conducted with partners over the last few years show that investors and the public have ranked banking and finance as one of the least trusted sectors. So the CFA Institute is really focused on improving that trust in the industry, because it's important that investors trust in the system so that they save and invest, and finance can be a force for good if they do so.
Why do you think the industry did such a bad job at or such an easy job at losing so much trust? Was there something specific, or was it more general? What are people's thoughts about that? Why did our industry lose the trust of investors? What did we do wrong? Come on, Christoph.
I think it's a lack of focus on who are we serving and benefiting in our jobs, in our work in the investment community. So I think a lot of people go in and say, well, how much money can I make out of this in my job? Which in effect is saying, how much money can I take from clients? And so you have a classic example of some management firms where you look at the founders and they're billionaires, where you look at another firm and maybe the founder is only a millionaire, right? And so where would you rather have your money? I'd rather have the guy, who's only a millionaire, and without mentioning names. And I think there's a classic book called Where Are the Customer's Yachts? And I think that sort of tells us the lesson without reading the book. But I think and people feel that when they say, well, you're rich and I lost money, I don't trust you anymore. It's as simple as that. Whereas, I've made money and you've also made money, well, now I trust you and I'm happy to continue the relationship. I think it comes down to that.
I think that too, and just adding to that, it's not only the trust. I think that the lack of trust also stems from transparency. So it's hard to trust someone where there's no way of verifying, or there's no there's the regulation that is there. How are they acting in my best interest? And there's no kind of governing body and to hold people accountable. I mean, you look through the financial crisis, I don't believe anyone went to jail.
Well, not many.
Not many,
yeah.
Certainly not many. In fact, you'd argue that if anything, the rich got richer. So if you're a hardworking person who's earned money and saved up, and you've lost a significant amount of your net worth through the financial crisis, and no one's given you that money back, or you've not stayed invested and continued, or lost some money, how are you going to trust that system, and how do you build on that, I guess?
Well, all eminently sensible questions and real issues for the industry, right? And so as the global body that represents the investment industry, the CFA Institute presumably has policies or rules or guidance about that. So help us understand what the Institute as the global representative body is actually doing, saying, talking about those elements.
We do have guidance, Simon. Thank you. The CFA Institute has a number of professional codes of conduct and standards that organizations can adopt that provide ethical guidance about behavior toward investors and how to manage their businesses in a way that align the interests of the firms with the interests of their clients. Monique mentioned the Putting Investors First initiative, which is another way that we're doing that, advocating for the professionals working in the industry to always advise their clients about their rights and their rights to have their interests come before those of their advisor.
And you talked about some of the codes and some of the standards. help us understand what those codes and standards are, because I think about it from this perspective as if I'm an investor and I'm approaching an investment professional, what do I need to ask that investment professional to find out whether they are adopting certain codes and standards? So what codes and standards should I be asking them about?
Well, the leading code that we promote to asset managers around the world is exactly that, the Asset Manager Code of Conduct. Over 1,300 firms around the world have adopted it, including some of the largest global asset managers. And it's a voluntary code of conduct to help asset managers practice ethical principles that put their clients first.
I guess there's also an important element, in a sense, we're promoting our own designation, but those people with a CFA charter have themselves a code of standard.
That's
practice, right. The code of standards and handbook or something like that.
That's right.
It's good you know it, isn't it?
You're
clearly practicing it.
Yes.
I'm sure I should know that more. Let's probably lose my charter for this, won't I?
It's a comprehensive standard code of conduct that every charter holder must profess adherence to annually.
Now, as an investor, you go to an investment manager or you go to speak to a professional, there seems to be almost an alphabet soup type of situation of different qualifications. Is that something that, how should investors navigate that? Is every qualification the same? Do they all mean the same thing? So what's different about the CFA designation that people should know about when they think of investment management?
Well, the CFA stands for Chartered Financial Analyst. It covers a very, very broad body of knowledge, from financial analysis and security valuation, economics, financial engineering, all of the different asset classes, including alternatives, and then, importantly, how to put all of that together in portfolio for a client that meets that client's needs, and all of that grounded in a good deal of ethical decision-making oriented content.
And then that obviously leads into the exam which we mentioned, the 3 years of torture, and those people that pass it then are eligible to be called charter holders, or is there some other? You have to have a certain amount of work experience.
That's right. Beyond finishing the 3 exams, members need to have at least 4 years of qualifying work experience, and that's working in the industry, an investment decision-making capacity, as well as adhering to the professional code of conduct.
Right. And what are the current sort of strategic priorities then of the Institute? We've got this body of charter holders around the world. What are the current objectives, and where's the future of the industry going? Where does the Institute think the future of the industry is going?
Well, we're working on 3 primary strategic outcomes that we would like to see improvement in the industry. First, our role is setting high standards of entry and professionalism for the industry, and that means the programs. We believe that anybody who's making decisions on behalf of investors should have the highest standards of education, and that certainly points to the CFA charter. We're also focused very much on delivering member value to our members, making sure that they continue to be highly educated, ethical professionals at the top of their field. And we do that through continuing education programs, content, conferences, and through delivery of support to our local societies who deliver value locally. But very importantly, we're advocating for regulations that promote business models within the industry geared toward achieving investor outcomes. And so we do that through promotion of our standards and codes of conduct, like the Asset Manager Code, and working with regulators around the world to advance governance and standards that put clients first.
So members of the Institute are actively involved with talking with government regulators and such like in order to do the things you've talked about?
That's right.
And that's around the various countries that you talked about with all the members.
That's right. Many of the countries where we have societies and local volunteers who are members of CFA Institute are developing markets. And so those professionals on the ground are actually quite helpful in guiding and providing guidance to local governments about the formation of their own markets.
So this segues into sort of the local community. Mm-hmm. When we talk about there are many rules and regulations elsewhere in the world, or in the world, about the standards that one must have to be an investment professional advising individuals on their money. And what are the circumstances here on Ireland? It's not quite the same, is it? Is that the guidelines and the rules? There aren't the same sorts of minimum standards of professional excellence and such like.
I don't, and Christoph, jump in here, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe, certainly from an investor standpoint, there's any sort of regulation on who can give appropriate investment advice. I think, and I think ultimately the onus falls on the investor to do the appropriate due diligence and to make sure to ask the questions. And I think, not being self-promoting the CFA charter, but it certainly is the highest or gold standard when it comes to investment management or managing wealth. And I think it's something that you as an investor should maybe not require, but it certainly is a good. It certainly ticks that box when it comes to that person or individual having the knowledge, expertise, and really acting in an ethical behavior. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add there, Christoph.
Just commenting on the regulation. So there is regulation of investment management industry through the Securities Investment Business License Regime.
CIBL, yeah.
But it does not, you're correct, it does not designate certain professional standards or minimum standards. So that's up to the investor to ask those questions and say, okay, what are your qualifications? And do you have a commitment to ethics? Do you have a commitment to a code of conduct? And, may I see that code of conduct? And what does that mean to you? I think those are all important questions that an investor should ask, not just, how much money are you going to make me? Because there's another side to that.
I guess, sorry.
I was just going to add to that, CFA Institute developed a statement of investor rights as a guideline for investors who are interested in understanding what is their right from a financial advisor and what questions should they be asking before they hire somebody.
Yeah, I think it's a crucial point. I mean, if you're an investor in, say, France, Australia, the US, Canada, there's an expectation that the government has done a moderate amount of due diligence on your investment professional because of the Series 7 or because of the Canadian Securities Course, I think it's called. Here in Cayman, there's some sort of vague wording in the law which must have certain experience, but it doesn't define what that experience might be. So anybody who's listening to this, who's going out and saying, well, I want to get financial advice, investment advice, you've got to be very clear that the people you're dealing with may not have qualifications because there's no rule in the law that says they must. And that could be a problem if people aren't aware of it. And I'm not sure if everyone's aware of that fact or not, but it needs to be more clearly made. It certainly would be my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's ultimately it's about protecting investors' rights so that they're not taken advantage of. And again, this trust issue is dealt with appropriately. So, I think at the end of the day, whoever is looking after or managing your investments, you ultimately want to make sure that they're making decisions with your best interests at heart. And again, how do you monitor that is difficult, but it certainly starts by you asking the questions and making sure that they do have some sort of credentials behind their name.
Christoph,
well, there's just one quick thing I want to add. While I don't want to take anything away from the investor's role in buyer beware, that's where our side comes in on the Institute Society and as charter holders to promote that there is this standard and you don't have to depend on the government oversight, because I think sometimes people think, oh, the government's protecting me. Well, then maybe that gives you a false sense of security. But it's our job to say, well, no, there are higher standards that we've voluntarily chosen to follow.
I'm going to throw out one last question, just for sort of a one or two word answer, if anyone has an answer. If you were advising somebody who was leaving school, who was thinking about the finance in investment industry, what one qualification, what subject do you think would be important for them to study? What should they know more about if they're asking for that advice? What would people say they should know more about? Anyone got any good answers for me on this one?
This sounds like a softball question, Simon. Look at the title of our show. I mean, clearly we'd all recommend that we achieve the highest standard, right? And in the investment industry, that's the CFA charter.
So consider studying it.
Absolutely. I mean, just the knowledge. When I remember when I was studying, I thought to myself, the general public should know this. I mean, this is stuff that I think all investors should know, right? So then it's our job to be those representatives of the investors.
And where do people go? This is even more softball question.
Yeah.
People go to the CFA Institute website, I suppose.
Yes, of course. We have a wealth of resources there to direct potential candidates to the program.
Fabulous. Well, I'm afraid, Randy, our time is up this morning, but thank you sincerely for joining us on our show.
Thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure. As a final note, though, before we leave, just want to thank all our listeners for tuning in and remind you that today's show will be able to be heard as a podcast on our CFA Society Cayman Islands webpage, and encourage you, if you have questions, to email us at moneysense@candw.ky, or do something on Twitter by tweeting us, I think it's called, at MoneySense Radio. You can tell I'm not a Twitter expert in that regard. And be sure to post any questions or comments that you have on today's show on there. With that, thank you once again, goodbye, and tune in 2 weeks' time.